Will the New York Knicks ultimately agree to a contract extension with Julius Randle? Find out right now on Locked On Knicks.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
You are Locked On Knicks, and today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. I'm Gavin, Schall, your favorite play-by-play broadcaster's favorite play-by-play broadcaster. Been covering the NBA as a media member for about a decade now. He is Alex Wolfe, editor-in-chief of The Strickland, the greatest Knicks website in the whole wide world. You can check them out on all forms of social media at thestrick.land to get the best Knicks coverage you can find anywhere on the internet. But if you want to supplement it, be sure to make Locked On Knicks your first listen today and every day. You can find us anywhere you can find podcasts. Be sure to subscribe on YouTube, like this video, comment, leave a 5-star review. It is the best way you can help the podcast grow. And be sure to hit that auto download function on your favorite podcast platform of choice so you have us with you on the go at all times, because then and only then you can find out what is going to happen with Julius Randle's contract extension. Alex, for a day, I'm losing track in this muggy New York weather, but day like 3 or 4 of Julius Randle watch, still no deal. So we decided to spend our depths of summertime wisely and do a primer here. I set the clock, the imaginary clock, for about a half hour. I wrote down 10 questions that we can get through on this Julius Randle primer, and we'll see how many we can go through. The first one. What is the max he can sign for now? I'll do that for everyone. It's a 4-year, $181.5 million contract. And in turn, he'd be rejecting a $30.9 million player option for 2025-26. Here's the actual hard question. I'm going to pass the baton so I don't have to do it. Do the Knicks actually want to give it to him? Should the Knicks actually want to give it to him?
I mean, I would, if it was me, I would say yes. And I think he's earned it at this point. You know, you could hold his playoff record up to say, oh, he doesn't deserve an extension that's going to pay him, upwards of over $40 million a season. But, the guy took a pay cut for this team the last time around. And I can remember after the 20-21 season, our buddy Jeremy Cohen, who's so good with the cap stuff and whatever, wrote this big article for me at Strickland that was like, all these different scenarios. And like 5 days later, Julius Randle, instead of doing any one of a million scenarios that could have made him so much more money potentially at the time. Obviously, we know how the 21-22 season went, and like it ultimately probably ended up pretty good for Julius to take the deal that he did. But at that time, he took a cut for the Knicks. He didn't even take the max amount that was on the table for him at that time. And he really did the Knicks a favor. So the way that this Knicks front office works is, at least to my eye thus far, is, you scratch our back, we'll scratch yours, and that is basically what this comes down to at this point. Is Julius took a pay cut for this team. They were able to use that flexibility that him making below market value gave them to get Jalen Brunson, to get Dante DiVincenzo, to get Josh Hart, to get OG Anunoby. Like, this whole team, more or less, it's maybe a little bit of hyperbole here, but more or less exists because Julius Randle was willing to take a pay cut after his career year in 20-21 and do this team a favor. So, and I think he's played his 2 best seasons of basketball the last 2 seasons, and unfortunately has had some really bad injury luck. I mean, the horrifically sprained ankle to end 2 seasons ago, which carried into the playoffs. He came back. He was just rounding into form, sprains the same ankle again, bad enough that he has to get it operated on like within a couple weeks after the season ends, and get the thing scoped, cleaned out. I would assume repaired a little bit because of some ligament damage or something. It was bad, and that's why I think that it's easy to say that that's why he didn't have a good playoffs that year. And then obviously this year tried his hardest to come back from, again, another sort of freak injury, the separated shoulder when he got undercut on a dunk attempt. And, there's nothing you could really do about that. And, he obviously was not able to be in the playoffs this year. But I think that based off what you've seen from him the last couple of years, based off what this team did in January, with him, with the current iteration of the Knicks, with OG Anunoby and Dante DiVincenzo and Josh Hart. And now you can envision a world where, okay, now you're just adding another primo defender and shooter to that same mix. It seems like kind of a no-brainer to me. I sign him to it. I don't think that the Knicks need to play hardball here. I think they're, we'll get into the numbers in a minute. There's maybe a chance they can like skirt the second apron for slightly longer if they try to convince Julius to like pick up his player option for next year and then extend him or something. But I think the reality is that it's going to still be difficult for the Knicks to stay under that second apron next year anyway. And if I'm them, I just put it on the table and I say, sign it if you want it. And if you don't, then we're going to have a talk. And that's where it would just come into, okay, so are you trying to hit free agency next year just to get as much money as you can from the Knicks? Or are you looking at potentially moving to a new team, and hopefully get an honest answer out of Julius and then move from there. But just in terms of the extension, I'm throwing him the full amount. I don't think twice about it. And I think I'll allow you to kind of rebut here a little bit before we get into it, but I think there's a lot of reasons to do that beyond even just Julius Randle earning the contract and being worth the contract. But, things like trade value and stuff like that, make it even more valuable.
Yeah, to me, it's not a question of deserve, because I'm with you at the end of the day. 2 All-NBAs in 4 years, maybe would be 3 and 4 if he stayed healthy. 3 All-Star appearances, or at least named an All-Star 3 times in 4 seasons. Like at this point, with the way the salary cap is going, like $40 million is not like even the median amount you get for that type of player. $40 million is generally the baseline you get for that type of player. And just because the Knicks got Jalen Brunson to take a once in a lifetime discount, that doesn't have to be the standard. And Julius Randle doesn't have to be expected to take that, especially because like I think given Brunson's importance to the team now and importance to the team down the road, like I think he knows for sure, just in terms of his value, that is going to be made up down the road. Julius, you can't say he has the same guarantee because he's just not quite on the same footing. He does not quite have the same organizational importance that Brunson does. And understandably, if he's incentivized to get every cent that he can right now, to your point, after being really generous with the Knicks in the past, like no one could blame him for that. So let me get that out of the way before saying, like, I do think there's some reason that the Knicks should try to work along the margins here. First of all, they have some leverage, and we'll get into this as we go, but I really don't think there are a lot of teams in the NBA that desperately want Julius Randle. The fact of the matter is, Julius Randle is more important to the Knicks than he is any other team. But also the Knicks are more important to Randle than like playing for another team. It's like, I think it really does mean more for him to win in New York. And I think also there are just very limited opportunities for him to win outside of New York. When you look at like what teams will have cap room heading into next offseason, it's not a lot. Also, I do think there is meaningful financial flexibility to be found if Julius was to, as Fred Katz proposed, agree to take to pick up his option next year at $30.5 million and then sign a 3-year max extension. Following that season, it would leave the Knicks, and we don't have the final number on this because we don't know what the salary cap is going to be in 25-26, but it would leave the Knicks approximately $20 million under the second apron, with 10 players under contract. And that is some meaningful flexibility. It allows them to use their mid-level exception next season, where it might be even more valuable than it is this season. And in terms of like the timing of signing him, if they're going to do it, I guess this is kind of a separate point. It should be within the next 3 days, because after August 8th, he can no longer be traded this season. You have to be signed on an extension. After an extension, you can only be traded 6 months later. So if you hit August 8th, that takes you 6 months forward to February 8th. He could no longer be traded this season, which I don't think it's likely Julius would be traded in season. But in a year, Alex, where you have championship expectations and there's real questions with how Julius will fit in this starting lineup post Isaiah Hartenstein being here, I do think it's important to have that option on the table. So we should note that it's coming up soon. There's a whole bunch of more like nuanced basketball discussion we can get into on whether or not this is a good idea, whether or not it's ultimately the right thing. I think at the end of the day, I agree with you from a talent perspective. He's deserving of this money. It's not the end of the world if he takes this money. OG Anunoby set a precedent of taking a whole lot of money, and Julius, who's probably a better player than OG, is still going to be making more than him, far less than him. So that's a reason he deserves it and should take it. I just think if you're the Knicks, you try to do what you've done with the vast majority of these guys and try to see if you can get a hometown discount and make it up to him down the road, because the championship window's now and every cent matters.
For sure. I mean, if he's willing to take a discount, I think you take it and run. It's just like the Brunson situation. Like, nobody was holding a gun to Jalen Brunson's head and saying you have to take this extension, but he did it because he wants to try to win a championship with this team and play with his buds and, you know, be a part of this team and, you know, continue doing things for New York. So, I think if Randle is willing to kind of follow suit, granted, Brunson took the maximum that was available to him at this time. It's just vastly less than what would have been available to him next offseason. Randle's case, I mean, it would be like, do you try to talk him into taking an identical extension to what Jalen Brunson just took, which would then keep his number for next year very similar to what it would be if he opted in, maybe like 6-7 million more, something like that as a starting salary, and then let him scale his contract up and kind of tie his fate to Jalen Brunson's. Even if he accepts the maximum offer that the Knicks can give him, it also would tie his fate to Jalen Brunson's in many ways, because they would be still on the same deal, basically, just like they were with this time, having presumably the same option years, same guaranteed years, all that good stuff. So, if you can get him on a discount, cool. If not, though, I would still give him the money and just keep that talented player on my team rather than create a rift. You certainly, I think, maybe an undervalued part of this whole thing is potentially creating a distraction going into the season with one of your three most important players. And just from like what that does to you on the court, I think that's potentially very damaging to this team.
For a guy who's been a little mentally fragile, to put it lightly, over these 4 years.
For sure. Yeah. A guy who's, who's, when the adversity comes up and, he feels like the fans and whatever aren't behind him. Now, granted, he's not the guy on this team anymore. And I think that had a lot to do with what happened in 21 to 22, where the pressure of the situation got to him and the team was underperforming and he put that on himself and whatever. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out first here in the offseason over these next few days, if they hit that extension in time, and then leading up to whatever his extension deadline is. I don't know if anyone fully knows what it is. I've seen it speculated a little bit, but that varies contract to contract. So, a guy's extension deadline could be right before the season. It could be the day before free agency. It all just depends on how it's negotiated when his deal was done. And I don't know if those details have been made public yet. But we still have more to talk about, such as what other teams would potentially, want to go after Julius Randle that could give him leverage. We'll talk about, if there's risks to playing it out this year. And then ultimately, of course, if we think that a deal actually gets done, and maybe we'll make a final number prediction on what we think it would be if it does get done or something like that. So it's all coming up in just a sec on Locked On Knicks.
Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're to speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for with eBay Guaranteed Fit. The part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. All right, we are continuing our 10 big Julius Randle questions. I just thought I should note, because just to put a bow on last segment, Julius, if he were to wait a year, would be eligible for a 5-year, $300 million contract. Now, unless the Knicks win the championship next year, which, hey, like is possible. It's more possible than spend any time in the next 20 years. I don't think there's any world where Julius would get that contract, but we should note the 4 for 181 is in some ways him still taking a substantial discount. It's not him. It's him getting every cent he can get right now. It's not him getting every cent that he could potentially get by waiting a year. But that's also a reason on the flip side why, if the Knicks and Julius don't agree, it's possible they go into the year and there's no bad feelings there, because Julius is kind of saying like, all right, like I'm pretty content to bet on myself. And if I come in and I just totally kick butt and put up 23, 10, and 6 on good efficiency in the playoffs, and let's just say we lose in 7 in the conference finals, like if that's the scenario that happens, like you're going into like that next negotiation, Julius is saying, I want 4 for 250. And if you're the Knicks, you go to say, all right, we got to give it to you because you proved you could be the second best guy on a team that was a game away from the finals. So there's a world where Julius and the Knicks don't agree. And it's not the end of the world from Julius's perspective. All right. Our next big question on Julius Randle. We kind of touched on this already, or at least I gave my perspective on it, but I'll throw it to you, Alex. Do you think there are any clear downsides to giving him a max? And I guess because you hinted at the idea that you think 4 for 180, he will be very tradable. I think that is actually part of my list of concerns, is that because we did a whole episode on this and went through the other teams, even though I think that's a totally fair number for him, I can't really pinpoint the team off the top of my head that would want to trade for him, though typically with all-star players, like that team comes out, but I wonder if that's part of the concern.
I mean, I don't really worry about it too much. He would be making $45 million average annual value on his contract. That puts him somewhere around, I don't know, the 20th or so highest paid player.
Even lower, like probably like 30 something. Yeah.
Yeah, by the time all these extensions and everything kick in, like that's paying him like a top 30-ish player in the NBA with how the landscape is for contracts right now. And more extensions might get inked between now and then. There will be guys that signed their well, there's already been a number of rookie maxes signed and stuff that are pressing on that number, like that Julius would be making, because it's just a different world now. And he's being given a raise based off what he was making, which was being underpaid, by the current standards, and he would still continue, I think, to be underpaid. I think the main reason I say he would be tradable and why it doesn't worry me too much, and honestly, I don't have too many downsides to this, if I'm being completely honest. To me, I'm like, I guess the only one is if you really think that you could talk him into picking up his player option next year, which why the hell would he do that? Like that is just insulting to ask him to do, to be completely honest. Like I feel like if anything would piss him off, that would be it. To be like, hey, man, we just gave Jalen Brunson his maximum amount that he could get on an extension. And like maybe you'd even be down with taking something similar to that's like maybe slightly more, but still less than your max. But we'd really prefer if you could pick up your option next year. Like, come on, that's ridiculous. In no way is that going to happen. And if it does, I mean, I'll eat crow on it. But I don't think there's any shot that that's the bet that they're making in this case. So if you have him then making $45 million annual value, I mean, that'll probably start just like head math at around 40 million, something like that, and then end at around 48 to 50 by the time the deal's over with, and you have his incremental raises and everything. Like, I think more so than like, I think some team would want to trade a butt ton of picks or something for Julius Randle. I think mostly you're just looking at, okay, like things don't work out with Julius after this year or next year or whatever, like let's say you get 2 years down the line and you're like, all right, Brunson's clock is ticking, Bridges' clock is ticking, Randall's getting older, like these guys are about to hit 30, because they're all kind of on the same age timeline, because obviously they all went to college together, the Nova guys. And you're like, all right, it's time for an upgrade. Like we need to change something up here. Well, now suddenly you have a guy that makes really close to the money of all the other superstars in the NBA. So if you want to, throw yourself out there and say, Julius, some of the picks we have available, some swaps, whatever, for star X that becomes available, maybe it's Giannis or something, like Giannis becomes available and you say, all right, that's the guy to take us over the top here. Then all of a sudden you have a salary that almost matches, and that's super valuable. And that's sort of the big hurdle that when we've seen names come up during this offseason, of like Karl Towns, for example, we saw his name come up, and then like, oh, the Knicks might be interested. And it's like, oh, that could be interesting to look at from a basketball perspective, but from a financial perspective, it's basically impossible with the way the Knicks roster is constructed now. They would have to give up so many pieces to make it work and not hard cap themselves with this new apron system. So having larger salaries, especially for guys that you're maybe not the most convinced in or convinced with, actually could be pretty valuable, I think, in this current landscape in the NBA, because it gives you a good building block, and everything now you're trying to be the team that's sending out more salary in a trade now. Like that's the way that if you're the contending team, you now have to be like, well, no more taking advantage of the 120% rule for us. We have to send more money than we're taking in. And the guy that we're getting off the team that's about to start tanking, like they can deal with the consequences of taking less salary right now and get hard capped or whatever, because they don't care, because they're about to tank. We need the to keep our flexibility as much as possible. And big salaries help do that. So that's why I think, that's why I say, like, I think that it would be have benefits for trade packages potentially.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great point. The next question I had here, and I might rephrase this as we go. Does Julius need the Knicks more than the Knicks need Julius? So where, and I'm going to combine it with the next one, which is will he be a part of their best lineup? Because I think what I'm getting at with both these questions is, like, what is the fit at this point for Julius Randle on the Knicks? Like, you go back to his second year on the team, like that legendary like We Believe team, like the COVID year, and like the fit was like he was the fulcrum, like he was just clear cut their best player. And I think, like, ever since we got Jalen Brunson, and Jalen Brunson, like, slowly but surely has proven, like, wait, like, is this guy going to be an all-star? Is this guy going to be a top 20 player in the league? Oh, wait, no, he might be a top 15 player in the league. Oh, wait, no, he might be a top 5 player in the league. And at that point, like, everything becomes about maximizing Jalen Brunson, but balancing that with having the most talent around him possible. And I say all that to say, to win an NBA championship at this point, you need to have near perfect talent and near perfect fit. Unfortunately, the Knicks Atlantic Division, and therefore their Eastern Conference rival, the Boston Celtics, and I'll throw the same caveat I always throw out when I praise it, makes me want to throw up in my mouth. They have near perfect talent and near perfect fit right now. And that's where the Knicks are having some issues, where I think from a talent perspective, the Knicks are actually shockingly close to being there with the Celtics. The issue is their perfect fit lineup right now is probably Brunson, DiVincenzo, Bridges, Anunoby, and a center, whether that's Mitchell Robinson or a different center that they'll acquire down the road. I don't think their perfect fit lineup includes Julius Randle. But Julius Randle is clear-cut the second most talented offensive player on this team. And I think there is a pretty substantial gap between him and Mikal Bridges for that moniker. Just his ability to create shots, his ability to distribute, his ability to just be someone you can give the ball to and just bulldoze his way to the rim at any point in the game as you hear the sirens going off. You're not supposed to say this stuff about Julius Randle, but I'm saying it. It is impossible for the Knicks to give that up right now and find equal value, which is why whether he signs an extension or not, like, there's no way he's going to be dealt before the start of the season at this point. And I think it's really unlikely the Knicks don't give this team at least a year to see if all the pieces can fit. I just wonder if at the end of the day, long-term, the Knicks see someone out there who is acquirable with that salary slot, and they say, okay, this person is comparable talent-wise, and at the end of the day is just a better fit than Julius Randle. It is just really stinking hard to find out who that guy is. And to your point, that might be an incentive to give him the extension, because then down the road, if someone like Giannis unexpectedly becomes available, then you have that contract to trade for him, and it buys you some time with Julius, and you ensure he's on the team for the next few years, that if that guy only becomes available in a couple of years, that you can make that trade then. So I'm kind of talking myself into giving him this contract as well, even if it hurts your flexibility a little bit next offseason. But we have 2 more big questions to get through, and we're going to get into them next on Locked On Knicks.
But first, we got to let you know about our friends over at Game Time. And Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch. And with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. Let me tell you guys, I was just using the Game Time app today. I'm trying to go to a Mets game with a couple friends. And I was like, hey, let me go check out the Game Time app and see what's on there. I'm always talking about this thing. And, it's about time I put up or shut up and actually go to a Mets game this year. They're down the home stretch of the season. And for 3 people, I was able to get 3 tickets in the 100 level in right field, where all the good food is, for $15 a ticket, $25 after all applicable fees. So $75 for 3 people to go to a Mets game. Pretty solid deal. And that's before I even used code Locked On to save myself a little money. That's right. Let me tell you about that. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code Locked On NBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON NBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, Gavin, we're back in to keep going through these final questions here. The big questions that surround a Julius Randle contract extension. You were the one that drafted this episode, so I would feel bad if I introduced any of the questions. So which question do you want to tackle next, Gavin?
Okay, we got two more. One is a two-parter. Let's hit the two-parter, and then we'll tell you if a deal ultimately gets done. But first, how risky do you think it is to play out this year? That scenario I presented before obviously could work out in the Knicks' favor, only in the sense that they have the. I think the biggest thing it gives the Knicks is the ability to trade him in season, which of course, again, they can do if he signs an extension in the next 3 days. But if he doesn't, and the Knicks want that flexibility for this year, that might be their reason for playing it out. If they think that there's not a major risk that Julius is going to do anything to warrant more money, and also if they think that there's not a major risk that another team goes out and steals him this offseason. So the other part of this question is, what other teams would even have the cap space to sign him? What other teams would ultimately be interested in signing him this offseason? And would Julius actually consider leaving after this year, which is obviously the doomsday scenario that the Knicks lose him for nothing.
Yeah, and if I'm correct here, we looked through the teams that would potentially have cap space next year, and it looks like the Hornets, just by virtue of not having a lot of high salary players, would probably have a good deal of space. The Lakers, I believe that's contingent on LeBron opting out, right? So if LeBron opts out, but obviously, I mean, he might just retire. Who knows? He might want to play 1 year with his son, and they flame out again. He might just be like, you know what? I think I'll just be a sports dad at this point and just sit in the stands and cheer my son on, and move on. In which case, maybe they say, hey, let's sign Julius Randle to be the sort of LeBron-ish replacement. Obviously not LeBron, but plays a somewhat similar style of ball sometimes. And then the Warriors, is that just contingent on? Is it Draymond's deal is expiring? Steph's deal, I think, is also, or is he just signed an extension? Did he not?
No, I think they're under contract. Basically, like those are the three teams I thought were most likely to be interested and have the ability to create the space if they wanted to.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So, I mean, other than that, I'm sure other teams could potentially make the room if they want to, or work sign and trade scenarios, which I think is going to become more common with these apron rules and everything, where teams kind of have to toe this weird line of wanting to have high salaries on the books to complete trades, but also, wanting to keep their flexibility open enough to be able to still sign players, or at least to execute sign and trades. So, I'm sure there could be other suitors that come up. I just kind of think, like, if Julius is truly money motivated, like, I think he would go for a team like the Hornets or something. Like, I think every player has this, like, battle in their head they have to fight between, do I want to make the most money, especially now, unfortunately, with how things are going in the NBA. Like, these guys are going to more and more have to make this decision of, do I want to make the most money, or do I want to potentially try to win a championship? And that's going to apply to, I guess I wouldn't really call Julius part of the middle class of the NBA, but he's sort of like in the 1A star class of the NBA, which I think that teams are going to start getting more reluctant to pay those sort of guys. So if he really wants to get the payday, I would say most likely he would end up going to a team that, has less to play for, but can give him a large sum of money. So I don't know. I don't know how to quite answer the question of risk from the perspective of how much leverage does Julius have from another team. But I do think that there will definitely be multiple teams that will be willing to give him at least what the Knicks can give him on this extension this year, in next offseason. And probably teams that would be willing to come to, like, roughly the level of where the Knicks came with OG, as far as getting close to what his max would be. So, like, getting like 80% of the way there. Like, I forget what OG's total number ended up being in terms of what his total max could have been, but it was like 85% of what he could have gotten at an absolute maximum on the, for his deal from the Knicks. And so I think that there's definitely teams that would pay Julius that way if it came down to it, which would probably be more than what the Knicks would be trying to offer at that point if they would show reluctance on even signing him to the extension this offseason, which, again, maybe it's not even up to the Knicks. Maybe it's Julius wants to play it out. In which case, I mentioned that there could be some animus there, but there's also a chance that he just plays a really good year, much like what OG did when he got traded to the Knicks this year. He was on his final year of his deal. Everybody knew that the free agency was looming, but slightly different scenario because the Knicks didn't get the opportunity to offer him a contract prior to the season, which, made it then where he was kind of like to Toronto, like, well, you're not offering me money, so send me somewhere that will offer me money. Found the Knicks. Ultimately, he gets his money. So I don't know. It's all very complicated. I feel like there's a lot of politics involved, and I don't envy Leon Rose if that's the situation that this team ends up being in. Don't envy Tibbs either for, having to potentially manage that. That said, Randle seems to truly be enjoying himself in the Jalen Brunson era. I think that he likes being able to just go out there and play looser, play more free, be the number 2, and this year maybe 2-3 option out there on the floor. So maybe it works out okay. But I think that those are the kind of the 2 risks. Like, 1, does he have the leverage? 2, does it turn into like a locker room issue at all?
Yeah, and to be clear, is I put those 3 teams there, but there's a couple more. The Jazz should have plenty of room. I don't think you want to go there. The Pelicans can create a lot of room. The Wizards, I don't think want to be good that quickly, but they could. The Spurs are actually a team like I probably should have highlighted because Wemby is probably, Wemby's probably the dream big for everyone to play next to with his ability to space the floor and cover up for Julius defensively. I don't really think you could build a better big than Wemby to pair with Julius. And if they don't get Lauri Markkanen, I could see San Antonio say, hey, we're willing to roll up the Brinks truck for you, big guy. We want to take advantage of having this generational prospect. So all of that is to say, like you can go through it. Like there are plenty of teams out there that can create space and potentially lure him away from the Knicks. So maybe I'm presenting that as a little bit too low of a risk, and maybe it's more of a risk than I think. Our final question: does a deal ultimately get done? My gut tells me yes, just because the Knicks always seem to pull the rabbit out of the hat and rarely take things to the furthest risk unless they have an intent of moving off the guy, like we saw with Emmanuel Quickly last year. But I'm gonna say no. I think I kind of am starting to think Julius might want to wait, might want to see what his market looks like, if he could potentially like leverage his way for a lot more. And I think at the end of the day, the Knicks aren't going to push back too hard against that because they're okay having the flexibility and they kind of want to see what this team looks like. But Alex, what do you think? And then just before we wrap up, give me 30 seconds on the Knicks signing Chuma Okeke to a Exhibit 10 deal.
Yeah, I'm leaning yes, and I'm just going to go yes. I think they're going to re-sign him. I think, we're seeing some reporting among the beat reporters and stuff that like Ian Begley, I think, noted that he's not, just his opinion, he doesn't think a deal gets done based off what he's heard. I just think the Knicks move in silence too much. Like, it's just kind of, I don't mean this is a slight to any of the beat reporters or anything, but they just don't let anything out of this freaking organization. Like, it's just Fort Knox. Like, I think that they're probably in touch with Julius's representation, and I think it's more than likely we see him re-up. I don't see why he would want to not re-up, and maybe it just comes down to he's never had a huge payday in his career, and maybe he's looking at himself being like, I'm in my late 20s, about to turn 30 soon. Like, this is the time to cash out. Like, I have a family, I've got a couple kids. Like, I want to get that final huge contract to set them up for life and everything else. And so maybe that's his motivating factor, but it just doesn't track with what he's done so far. And his last contract was very clearly motivated. And he said as much. He said it straight into a microphone. Like, I took this contract to help this team win and to help build a better team. So I want to stay here. I'm grateful to the Knicks for letting me blossom into a superstar, whatever, and maybe something changed over the course of the last, 3 seasons to change his mind on that, but I doubt it. I really don't think that's the case. I think that he's going to end up signing the extension. Maybe he takes a little bit of a haircut for the Knicks. Maybe they approach him and say, hey, can we do this where we can get your first year in where we'll be like just under that hard cap next year, hopefully, or under the second apron, I should say, not the hard cap. They're hard capped at that this year, but hey, like, can you help us maybe try to come in just under that second apron again so we can keep this team together as long as possible? And maybe he does that. Would not be surprised because he did that the last time around to help them out too. Took a haircut and, lopped off, a handful of millions off of what he could have made even on that extension. So I think there's a decent chance that he does that. On the Chuma Okeke front, I'll just use this as an opportunity to tease our next episode. So we're gonna I reached out to Philip Rossman Reich of Locked On Magic. So we're gonna talk about Chuma Okeke a bit. He signed with the Knicks on a Exhibit 10 deal. At least from what I understand, it's an Exhibit 10 deal. The way those work, I'll just give a quick primer again, which I'm sure I'll talk about them once training camp comes up again. But more or less, it's a deal that's designed to be a training camp deal, but a little more like I think they give them just slightly more money during training camp, so a little more guarantee during that. Then if they get cut, then they're allowed to pay that player more at the G League level to play for Westchester. So I don't know if Okeke's like quite at that level, if I'm being honest. Like I thought he's a guy that showed some decent promise in Orlando. So I'm a little surprised to see that he's already in Exhibit 10 territory. But whatever. I mean, if that's how it ends up working, or he might compete for and win that final roster spot for the Knicks. But I do think I don't know how these Exhibit 10 deals count towards the hard cap that they have at the second apron. That said, I think they're in less danger than ever of hitting that now because like they only have $5 million to work with to sign another player to that taxpayer mid-level exception. Precious signed for only $6 million. So like I think they had like 15 million going into these last couple roster spots under that cap. So there was kind of like a little wiggle room for if they decide to trade for a higher value player and, like sign Precious to a bloated 1-year deal to make something happen for someone who makes like $10 million. Obviously that's not happening now. So, maybe they still hand out these, I don't know what the Exhibit 10 contracts pay, like a few $100,000 or something. Like maybe they hand out these still like candy and treat their G League players well, but they've been doing that ever since the Steve Mills era. They'll hand out, I don't know, 10 Exhibit 10 contracts every offseason during training camp and sign a guy, cut him practically the same day, sign a guy, immediately after, fill that spot again on the camp roster, keep going, just keep cutting guys and then giving them, extra money to play for the Westchester Knicks. So maybe that's what happens to Okeke. Maybe it's not. Maybe he's good enough that he'll earn that last roster spot, which I'll hear about with Philip, hopefully. But till next time, thank you all for listening. Hopefully this is informative on the Randle situation. We'll see how things develop over the next coming days, potentially weeks, potentially month plus, however long it is until his extension deadline is. But we'll have you covered all steps of the way. Till next time, thank you all for listening, and we'll talk to you soon. Peace out.